Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Dr. Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner, share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina.
Widowhood, our conversation today with Vicky, she is going to share about suicide. That's the conversation that people try to shy away from. They don't know what to do. When we have no choice but to talk about it, but to experience it, and to give you hope of what life can look like. In Vicky's words, if you choose to. Vicky has dealt with the suicide of her son, her husband, and the cancer death of her daughter. And yet, she has found a way to have hope, provide encouragement, and support to other grievers. Let's get into this conversation now. Hello, Vicky. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for having me. I'm grateful and humbled to be here.
Oh, your story, your life has been a lot of layers. And when you hear welcome to the Widowhood, what's the backstory? What are you thinking about when you hear that?
To be honest with you, Tina, I pushed back against that title when it first was applied to me. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 months after my husband Leo died, I went to attend his mother's funeral. She passed away. So I was surrounded by his family members, and one of his sisters started walking me around the room, introducing me as Leo's widow. And I hadn't had that experience yet, so it kind of slammed into me. I wasn't sure what I felt about it. I cried about it in my hotel room that night, but then I kind of wore it like one of his old chamois shirts that I used to put on just so I could smell the wood smoke from our fire pit and the forest that he always walked in. And so I kind of wore the title widowhood as a warm blanket for a while, until there came a time and a chapter in my life, about, I think, right after the second year. At the end of the second year, there was an occurrence in my life that made me realize I had to let go of the marital relationship. And so I kind of dropped the name widow at that point as well. So it still applies to me. I'm not Leo's wife. I am his widow, but I am no longer approaching the world of wearing that title up front. It just sort of comes out naturally in organic conversation.
Thank you for sharing the evolution of that. I know for myself, when someone identified me for the first time, it was shocking. It took my breath away. And someone that has not become a widow, I think it's hard to understand. Well, it's just a word. Why does it matter? Da, da, da. And it's just like everything encompassing in that. And I was like, that's where I am. That's my life right now. And I can appreciate how you shared over time your connection with that word change. And for someone listening to this conversation to realize the way you feel now versus the way it may change later, it has the potential to shift.
Yeah.
And that is important because some people feel like their death is final, but the way in which we engage it has the opportunity to adjust over time.
That is correct. Yes, absolutely true. Hmm.
Well, your life is layered, and we have an amazing book, Through Grief Colored Glasses, A Life Reinvented by Devastating Loss. And devastating loss indeed. But before we dive into the book, can you tell us about all three of the people in your life that have brought you to this place?
Sure. It was a crazy ride for sure. Devastating in the beginning, but by the time I traveled through it all, I learned to actually love my story. It is, I think, a romantic story. I mean, think about movies like The Notebook, which is centered around death, is it not?
Yes. But is it
However,
all of life?
so beautiful. I mean, we all come away with the tears, but our hearts are cracked wide open after witnessing such a beautiful story. So I feel, just as a caveat to the readers or the listeners, that my story is beautiful. This is the place I've come to at this point in my life. It didn't start out that way. In 2002, my 18-year-old son Adam took his own life. Unfortunately, 20 minutes after wishing me a happy Mother's Day on the phone and telling me he loved me, he was gone. That was devastating. I won't get too deep into it because we could be here all day with that particular story, but it rocked my world. I had no inner compass. I had no guidance for how to deal with grief, pain, and loss. Growing up, there was no religion was just sort of something we dabbled in on Easter and Christmas. It wasn't a regular practice, so I didn't have a faith-based community to lean on. I couldn't find help anywhere. My community programs for grief support were very lacking. They kind of threw everybody into the same room, and then the stories just looped round and round. There was no path to healing there. I recognized that right out of the starting gate, and it left me feeling isolated. So I also struggled, Tina, a lot with what people were saying to me. So, when you lose a child, and especially to suicide, all kinds of things come out of the woodwork. You must be so angry at him for doing what he did, leaving you with this mess. Okay. Can you imagine how hurtful that is for a mother to hear when her son apparently was in so much pain that he couldn't face one more day on this planet? And you want me to be mad at him and angry at him for the mess he left me to clean up? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around where these thoughts and sentiments were coming from. And then there's my favorite one, there's no coming back after the loss of a child. Well, society believes that. However, I had a child to bury, and I was not ready to lay down the torch of my life. I was 40 years old. So I had a lot of living to do. So I had to fight back against those kinds of belief systems. And that set me on a path. And once I started diving into that path, a few years later, my daughter, my son Adam's sister, Tiara, my only surviving child, who was, I want to say 28 at the time, she called me to tell me that she had cancer. That again brought me to my knees because I immediately felt the enormity of it. Like, I knew it wasn't easy cancer. As soon as she started telling me what the statistics were and whatnot, I dove into some research, and I could see the writing on the wall that hers was a rare and aggressive cancer that people just simply did not survive. So I had to walk through that journey. It took 2 years for her to, give up her life to this disease. And I was with her the whole time. We moved her eventually into my home for the hospicing portion of the journey. And so I held her the day she died. And so I took what I learned after processing Adam's death into this journey, and I used it. The cancer itself taught us how to slow down and be in the moment. We had all these precious moments we could share, knowing that her death was coming. We prioritized our time together. We focused on each other. We healed a rather difficult mother-daughter relationship while we still had time. And we kind of checked off all those things on our bucket list. And I kind of grieved her in little tiny increments along the way. We were saying goodbye and letting go of each other slowly. It's kind of like the difference between ripping a Band-Aid off quickly, which is what happened with Adam, or peeling one off slowly. They both hurt in different ways, right? So that cancer taught me how to fully surrender to what was out of my control, which is imperative that we learn to do if we are to accept what has happened in our life, right? And then it also taught me how to live in that now moment that all the spiritual gurus talk about, and the importance of that and what it can do for the presence, the body, mind, and spirit, being in a safe place, which is this now moment, as opposed to worrying about the future or reliving a traumatic event in the past. So I got through that process. I found her death actually to be quite beautiful, because I was so present for it and allowed, and by that time we were rooting for her to go because of the suffering, of course. We wanted her, she was ready to go. She couldn't wait for it to be over with. So it was a day of celebration when she died. Now, that does not mean there was not grief. Of course, there was grief. I just lost my last remaining child. She left behind 3 small children, so I had the grandbabies to focus on. Well, that was a blessing. And my husband and I, Leo, had a big property out in rural New Hampshire, out in the woods, a beautiful property. And we would host those grandkids every single weekend. We taught them how to hike in the woods. We taught them how to grow food in the backyard. We taught them how to cook the food, all the things. And so that was beautiful for a while until it wasn't. My husband, Leo, struggled with a couple of different things. He had what I believed was bipolar syndrome or some other type of mental disturbance or chemical imbalance in his brain. And I'm guessing at this because the man would never agree to any type of diagnosis. He would not expose himself in that way. He grew up in a culture where big, strong, burly men did not reveal their weaknesses, right? So he lived with his disease, which eventually led to alcoholism, which of course the alcoholism compounded the issues with the bipolar. And eventually this led to a time in our lives where things were really rocky in our relationship. Things were really rocky in his relationship with his own kids and family. And there was some family drama that just, I really, I want to get across up front that when someone takes their own life, the people left behind should never, ever accept any, and I mean not even a tiny little bit of responsibility for that decision. However, I can just talk about, these events kind of led up to his mindset, but in that mindset, it was his choice to put a gun to his head as opposed to asking for help. So that's where the disconnect becomes. It's no longer it's not the family's fault. It's not the drama. Families have drama all the time, but everybody doesn't go around killing themselves over it, right? So my husband did. I think really he was just tired, Tina, and he was just done, and that was a traumatic experience for me. I was there. There were police there. There were local authorities there. There was kind of a standoff. They were outside the property on the road. My husband was in the forest on our property, and they were talking to him on the phone, and they kept me at bay just at the top of the street, but they wouldn't let me onto the property, obviously, for my own safety. But I was there to hear the shot. And so I sat and waited in my car for the sheriff to come up and give me the news. So that was a tough one to go through. It's a complex grief journey because there was suicide involved. It's also complex because it's your spouse, and that kind of, very well, when your spouse dies, it's more than just the grief you have to shoulder. You have to shoulder 100% of the finances. You have to shoulder this big 9-acre property now, and the 3 big dogs, and all the things that come with. I have to shoulder trying to stand up to all the questions and the accusations and the stuff that flies around between people after a death by suicide. So I had to take on all of that while also understanding that I was in a codependent relationship with an abusive alcoholic. And so I couldn't just live in the land of putting the dead up on the pedestal. I had to keep reminding myself who he was and what had transpired between us so that I did not skip over or sugarcoat over that lesson that was there, that opportunity to learn that I had to learn to, stand on my own 2 feet, rebuild my own life. And that's what I did, Tina. I rebuilt my own life at that point from the ground up, stripped it right down to the bare studs, built myself from the ground up, and completely dove into taking the controls of that process along the way. Because by then I had learned that I did have a choice in how I experienced and carried my grief. And I decided to participate in it and guide it and control where it would take me.
I'm going to just move into the book, and because more to be revealed. And I have some posted in here, and we're just going to go through the pages
Okay.
and let you continue to share your story. And as we have this conversation, for the person listening and considering purchasing the book, what do you think is the main takeaway or how they would benefit from reading your journey?
So I'm getting a lot of great comments and feedback from the book, and it kind of spans the gamut. The book is rich with multiple different types of grief, different facets of grief, different faces of grief, different phases of grief, and all the things. And I'm pretty open about sharing exactly what it was like. You've been reading some of it, so I'm not pulling any punches. I'm not
At
hiding
all.
anything. I'm not sugarcoating anything. There's even a sex scene in there. But what it does is it shows my process of being completely broken because I was unprepared to all the way to the end, to this traumatic event with Leo. I literally knelt on the forest floor next to his blood and offered Reiki energy healing backwards in time to my deceased husband. I was able to do that for him. I wasn't a blubbering mess that couldn't, that shock of the suicide of the first one. I didn't even know how to speak to people. Like, I literally just shut down. I stopped speaking. My family was worried about me, all the way to the point where now I'm leading the show. I'm cleaning up the property. I'm giving him Reiki the day he died, and I am hosting his whole family for a memorial celebration of life on our property. I'm giving the eulogy myself, that kind of thing. So the book shows that transgression between being broken all the way to being like really present, whole, confident, strong, capable, and learning how to really engage in life. And that's what my grief story did. So that's what I hope people get out of it. It's just a little hope and inspiration. It's also full of some tips here and there that folks have been grabbing onto. And like I said, the comments that come in, one person, for example, was floored by a story I have in there, and I'll just say it's the story of my son's hat, and I'll leave it there because I don't know what you plan on sharing. But she read this passage where I talked about coveting my son's baseball cap, and then that gave her, in her words, that gave me permission to go upstairs in my attic and take down the box of clothes that I have of my brother's because I really want to wear his sweatshirt, but I have been afraid that people will think, badly of me or worry about me if I do. And now you just gave me permission to do that. So that's just one passage from the book that gave this one person permission to grieve how she wants to grieve and to stop worrying about what it's going to look like to the rest of society. So I love that, but
So when
I
we
could go
think of
on.
no, there are people in your community that have been a steady. Tell us about Donna and Cheryl, who you talk about in the acknowledgments.
Donna and Cheryl in the acknowledgement. So Donna is a friend from many years back. She's an old family friend who goes back to when my kids were little children. She was the neighborhood babysitter. So back then, we didn't really have a lot of like daycare centers and things like that. Stay-at-home moms took on other people's children. So she actually made a daycare out of her home. She never had children of her own. So Donna was an old-time friend who knew my babies since they were little. And what she did the day we buried my son was the best thing anyone could have ever done for me during that time. And I don't know if she knew she was doing it or not, but she simply walked up next to me when I was standing at his grave, when the priest was giving his graveside prayers. She walked up next to me. She reached out and just touched my hand. She didn't try to force herself to hold my hand. She just touched it so that I would know she was there. And then she stepped one step behind me and crossed her arms and just stood. You know, that was like the biggest validation that I was being seen, that she knew. That one little touch told me that she knew she had no right to force her way into my inner circle or to try to touch my body or to force a hug on me. Or she knew that if she just stood there and quietly supported, she's going to just stand behind me. I got your back, is what she was saying. Now, Cheryl is a newer friend. I didn't meet Cheryl until my son had already died, but she was a friend of mine during my daughter's illness and then eventually my husband's suicide. You know, she knew my daughter and my husband and the family by then. And she's kind of been my biggest supporter for this whole book project. The book has been coming for years. People have been asking for it for years. I've known I was going to write it for years, but you know, you got to wait for divine timing for that kind of thing. But she was the friend who always supported, but never said, is it done yet? Well, when is it going to be done? Well, what do you know? You know, and so by the time it was actually done, and she knew I was working on it, still took me 2 years to get it through the writing, the formatting, the editing, the polishing, you know, all the steps till it's finally in print. She was the first one I sent a copy to, because she's the one, when I announced it was done, who just said, bravo, well done, and not, she never said it's about time. So she has always just let me go at my own pace. She, again, is my biggest supporter. She's had some significant losses herself, so she appreciates when I spend time with her just to let her grief be seen and heard. You know, we took a trip together last year to Europe, and we both had some very profound experiences where we feel we connected to, in her case, her father, and me, my children, at different areas of that trip. And so it was really a beautiful time for both of us to share. So,
And Linda.
Linda, my sister. Linda is, so in my family, there were 4 of us, 3 girls and a boy, and Linda is the youngest. I am the second born. Linda and I were always the closest of the siblings. And Linda and I have always lived near each other geographically, whereas the other 2 have moved to different areas of the country. But Linda was present during all 3 grief journeys. Linda, unfortunately, God bless her, was the one to find my son after he took his own life on Mother's Day back in 2002. Linda also came to my house and volunteered, you know, 1 day a week to run hospice care for my daughter, because I had to keep a cycle of people, you know, caregivers coming for her. And then Linda was the first on the scene to come and support me. You know, she's who I called after I notified Leo's children of his death. My sister was the first one to arrive to hold me up during that process as well. And now we share a home together. We actually were roommates here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we've been, you know, that kind of came about because of COVID. COVID kind of shifted how we all live and experience the world, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Many people say that they don't have anyone and they're grieving. How do you think these 3 people impacted your grief journey?
So I hear people when they say they don't have anyone, and even when you're surrounded by lots of people who really want to support you, you're still grieving this thing by yourself. I mean, it's nobody else has your story. Nobody else is seeing through your lens. Nobody else knows everything that's bouncing around in your head. I mean, the grief storm is just that. It's a storm of whirring, flying debris. And, my thoughts are the debris. They just whir and fly around and spin out of control. And I can't necessarily share it with anybody. So you kind of feel isolated even when you're surrounded by people. But I'll tell you what, Tina, one of my biggest saving graces, and it's one of the first blessings I grabbed onto and held dear and was appreciative of after my son Adam died, and that was a continued connection with them in spirit. That came about pretty strongly in the beginning with Adam. And I cultivated that. I needed to learn about that. I know you've talked with other mothers on your podcast who have lost children before, and I hear them all say the same thing. We need to know where they went. We need to know that they're okay. I am literally going to follow him to the grave if I cannot discern for myself where he is right now and that he's okay. And that he's not, then in this case, that he's no longer anguished and tormented and suffering. I needed to know those things. So I luckily was able to feel him. I had a little bit of an interest in the paranormal and the mystical. It was kind of an entertainment thing for me, but I did understand that some people believed they could talk to the dead, after they passed. But I'd never really experienced it myself. So I dove into studying that sort of thing and had some really wild experiences, and they all helped me to release my need to follow him, which was becoming dangerous for me. And I know a lot of mothers and fathers too, parents who lose children feel that way. It's not that we don't want to live anymore, Tina. It's that we need to continue to parent our child, and it's almost an instinctual, it's a physical. It's kind of like that phenomenon when you stand on the edge of like the Grand Canyon and you look over and you have this like really bizarre sensation that you want to jump, but you don't want to jump, but it's like this sensation that kind of comes over. That's what it's like for us as a parent to have our child die. If you don't have a strong faith in knowing where they went, everything in your being wants to follow behind. Well, I'll just go so that I can, and so we get a little suicide ideation ourselves going on. Luckily, I never followed through with it, but it was there.
Yeah. How would your grief look differently if you did not have those three women in your life?
So definitely my sister gave me an anchor. So she was family. She was someone I knew from childhood, obviously. And they gave me an anchor to keep coming back to. All three of those women. Now, Donna was at that point, she was kind of on the outskirts of my circle because we weren't geographically close anymore. So I wouldn't say she really affected my grief, except that moment at the grave that I described and thanked her for in the book was something that stuck in my head from day one, and it's something that I leaned on as I began to study how people respond to grief and different approaches to the grief work that we're doing to support people. I began to understand, she's the one who taught me the very first basic principle that grief needs to be seen and witnessed and heard. That's all that's required of our support system in the beginning. Just listen, just be there, be present, stop trying to fix us. Don't interrupt our release with a hug too soon, shutting off our faucet, trying to force us to feel better. We don't want to feel better right now. And quite frankly, that's the wrong approach. Is we've got to let this thing move through us. And if we don't feel it now, then we're just going to bury it somewhere in our body and have to deal with it later. So, folks think they're helping. Oh, they come over, they want to cheer us up, they want to take us out, they want to force us to engage in life. I might not be ready to engage in life yet, so all the things. Those women let me feel it. Those women also let me talk about the things I felt that were contacts from my son. If I felt like I was hearing from him, I could tell these people, and they wouldn't try to explain it away, and their eyes wouldn't glaze over, or they wouldn't give me the "you poor dear" look, "you poor dear, you're just reaching for straws here," that kind of thing. No, they were genuinely interested in my stories. They even became excited about some of my stories. They laughed with me, and that's what I needed. And that's what I needed. So,
Thank you for sharing that. I want to go to page 23 of the book. And if you would read starting with "if" and then to the next page, "intimidating."
if you have suffered a painful loss, you will undoubtedly see yourself within these pages. It is my hope that you will come away with a deeper sense of peace and know you too can enjoy a fulfilling life while experiencing grief. And if you haven't lost anyone close to you but expect to one day, your curiosity has also brought you to the right place, because you will gain insights within these pages that will help shape your perceptions of death and grief, making your future journeys through the pain of loss less intimidating.
What does that mean to you now to read that after so many years and thinking of the person on the other side receiving this book?
Well, I just have so much. I have a much larger capacity to love. Having gone through all these grief journeys, I have a much larger capacity to love and hold space for others in this kind of pain after helping so many people over the years. And that kind of sums it up to me. It is my biggest desire and hope that just a simple story like this one, where they can actually see by example, by living example. Like, I don't know about you, but I dove into research, of course, after Adam died. By the time Tierra died, I was well on my path. I did not research grief per se after Tierra died, but I read a lot of books after Adam died, and I would get some help. I would get a little bit of help here and a little bit of help there, but nobody was pulling anything like really together. The memoirs were great because it gave you a glimpse into, oh, like, okay, she's experiencing that too, so maybe it's kind of normal. So that takes a little bit of the fear off my plate, right? That I'm losing my mind, or right? If
Yes.
somebody just told me that, no, you're not losing your mind, you just fried your circuits for a minute, they will recover. Don't worry. If someone had just told me that in the beginning, I might not have had so much fear to have to struggle through on my own.
Yes.
So that's what that phrase is. It's really just setting the person up to, okay, this book is going to give me what I need, and I'm hoping it opens them enough to when they turn the page, that's how they receive the story, as a genuine a life rope.
Thank you for that. In part one, I want to talk about the artwork where it says, so let's go page 29. How did you come to that being the pictures to the left of page 29?
Oh, with the dragonflies and
Yes.
yeah. So, well, actually, I hired a book designer, so I can't take the credit for it. However, I did tell her I wanted dragonflies somewhere in my book, because the name of my grief support system that I have developed is called Dragonfly Wisdom. And I named it that. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the children's dragonfly story?
Please share for everyone.
Well, it's a story that I use to help children understand death. But it goes like this. In the bottom of an old pond lived some grubs who could not understand why none of their group ever came back after crawling up the stems of the lilies to the top of the water. They promised each other that the next one who was called to make that urgent climb would return and tell them all what had happened to him. Soon, one of them felt an urgent impulse to seek the surface. He rested himself on the top of the lily pad and went through a glorious transformation, which made him a dragonfly with beautiful wings. In vain, he tried to keep his promise. Flying back and forth over the pond, he peered down at his friends below. Then he realized that even if they could see him, they would not recognize him because now he was such a radiant creature. The fact that we cannot see our friends or communicate with them after the transformation, which we call death, is no proof that they cease to exist. So my whole program resides upon opening yourself to the possibility that there is something larger out there than what we can all see, feel, hear, and touch.
Talk about the program a little bit and the work that you're doing to help other people.
Okay, so the book finally just came out this last year, but since 2016, that was the year I left my full-time job back in New England when I was living up in New England, and I took up space in a wellness center. I had a yoga studio. I was teaching classes and whatnot. I was offering grief support groups. So I've been working with folks around grief since 2016. I hadn't really developed a comprehensive program. I was kind of winging it, just servicing the folks who came to the metaphysical and spiritual workshops I was teaching. Those who were interested in the grief support would come for that. But that period of time that I was doing that actually served as a classroom for me, because I started noticing that I can't run a grief support group, an effective one, with everybody in all phases of grief thrown into one circle in front of me. Because when you have, so I developed a 2-phase grief support system, because when you are fresh in your grief, or even if it's not brand new, but you have not been able to move past that initial acute phase, if you are still in that acute phase where the pain is overpowering and you don't see a way out of it, I cannot throw you into a room full of people who are being taught how to look for the gifts in grief.
And I want to hear that.
When you're in acute grief, if someone says that to you, you're going to get slapped.
Yes.
Or they're going to walk out. They're not going to want to come back to your group. So I have created a program that supports and holds the acute griever in a place of story tending, but story tending with a purpose, not just a looping story that is just becoming more deeply ingrained in your whole being. Because the more you tell your story without adding ways to stretch your mind around reframing it, the more that same story will just, it's like the old LP records we used to listen to, and that needle would get stuck in a skip. If we just let it skip, that groove would get deeper and deeper and deeper, and then it's harder to knock that needle off its path and send it on a different trajectory, right? So that's the same thing with your mind. The longer we allow the damaging. So anyway, I have the Dragonfly system kind of walks, what it is I'm going after the peer-led public grief support system, which is either non-existent in rural communities, or you end up with large corporations running, or large organizations running grief support systems in larger communities, but the rural people can't get to them. I didn't have the help when I needed it. I want to make sure people coming after me have some help, and help that actually will lead them up and out of it. So the system is designed, I'm writing a manual now, which will people can purchase, and it'll be like a field guide for them if they want to run their own groups, and they'll have this manual, and the manual will break it into 2 phases. And then so they would have 2 separate groups, one for acute grievers and one for people who are who are curious enough to and willing to participate in their grief. And there's a difference, and you've got to get to that point, and not everybody gets to that point. Some people just will go through the story tending part and just say, okay, I'm less fearful, I have less anxiety, I'm just going to go live with this now. And that's fine. But there are lots of people, myself included, I know you're one of them, who are just curious. They're like, no, there's more. I can climb up out of this. I know I can. This is not going to take me down. This is not going to hold me here. It's not going to be my identity for the rest of my life. And when that curiosity starts budding in you, then you jump to phase 2. And that's where the real work begins. But I'm going to ask you to engage in your grief. I'm going to ask you to feel it. I'm going to ask you to participate with it. And I'm going to ask you to take the controls of how your life will be rebuilt because of it. And so there are different sets of exercises that I use, and the way I've laid out the manual is kind of in an a la carte menu form. I'm addressing it holistically, so I'm using little icons to show you this little exercise or prompt will help the body, mind, and spirit in these ways. And I give you the different ways, and I train the people or encourage the people who are facilitating to read the group. Take your cues from your group. If your group is predominantly fearful around the physical aspects, I can't think anymore, I can't sleep, I'm not eating, then you go see page 42, and that's where boom, you'll get your list of exercise events and different things that you can do with them, journal prompts, there's meditations, there's QR codes to link to meditations, there's different website links they can go to for more information, there's invitations to have and suggestions for guest speakers. I think, public grief support groups would be able to get guest speakers to come in and volunteer their time to speak to your group. I've seen it happen all the time. I've been able to pull people together, people who come in and do yoga for grief, massage for grief, somatic breathing exercises, all the different things that the practitioners are doing to help us, body, mind, and spirit. And so that's the premise behind the book, the manual, and I hope to have it published by the end of this year. So I'm plugging away at it, Tina. I'm still just one person working on all this stuff.
You're doing an amazing job. And you do provide insight about the dragonfly wisdom in the book. If someone wanted to reach you, how do they contact you?
So my business name is White Elephant Wisdom. So my website is whiteelephantwisdom.com. And if you go there, you can reach everything else. So if you go to whiteelephantwisdom.com, you'll find links to buy the book. There are, of course, pages on my website giving you my services and options. You can work with me directly. I do one-on-one sessions, working as, I call myself a grief journey guide. I don't want to really be a coach because I'm not coaching you how to handle your grief. I'm guiding you through your grief. I'm walking next to you as you walk through it, and I'm just showing you the different doorways available to you that you might not have realized you had as options, and you get to choose, that kind of thing. So grief journey guide, I do have private sessions, and then I do public speaking. I've been starting to fill my calendar with some book signings and readings and things like that. Yeah, so I will eventually develop an online course. It's going to take me, it'll be at least another year or so before I can get to the online course. But once that Dragonfly Wisdom Manual is out, published, and available, I'm going to start working that. So there will be an online course that people can sign up for if they want one-on-one help from me. And most people can just grab that book for whatever it ends up being for on, $15 or whatever on Amazon. They can grab that book and they can take it into their own pre-existing grief support group, and they can run with it, and they can just pick and choose what they want to use out of it. They don't have to follow it. Like I said, I'm setting it up as an a la carte menu so that the facilitators take their cues from the griever and use what fits their group and discards the rest. And so once all that's in place, then I plan. Well, I'm still working full time, and I have a long commute back and forth to work each day. A city traffic commute, which is not a lot of fun, but within the next, 3 or 4 years,
It's coming soon.
Which will come really fast. Time's going really fast right now, yes. Right? And during that time, I will have the manual out. I will have built the online program, and then I'm going to start working the program here in my local St. Petersburg, Florida community. So I have already talked to a few people around here who are interested in bringing it on. So basically what I'll do is offer my time up more and more, the more my time becomes available to go out and start facilitating and getting some of these groups up and running in my local community. There are senior centers here that want it. There's, a local church that's interested and so forth. So we'll go from there. But once all that is in place, then I take myself on the road.
Oh, wow. I have 2 more parts of I have many, but I think I'm gonna have us cover 2 more sections and see where we go from there. If you would go to page 29, I
Mhm.
think this is everything is so important, but I hear people speak about this a lot, and I think it's super important. Chapter 1, if you would start with the name of the chapter and then this ending with the second paragraph back.
The name of the chapter is Don't Believe Everything They Say. They say that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. They also say there's no coming back after losing a child. Statements like these are prevalent in our society, made evident by our ability to recall and recite them word for word whenever fitting circumstances arise. We innocently parrot back such sentiments to each other without really taking a moment to think about where the statement originated and whether it's actually true. We certainly never consider the lasting imprint that hearing such statements might leave on the recipient, especially if they are in a vulnerable state. By now, you know I've lost not one but both of my children, and yet here I am, still standing and enjoying a life full of rich experiences, with a childlike sense of curiosity and wonder when faced with the unknown of what my own future may bring. I think it's safe to say that I am living proof that the no coming back from losing a child statement is undeniably a lie, for I most definitely have come back.
For the person that's leaning into this conversation and they are hearing every word of this they've heard for years or months or days, and they're thinking, how can I come back? Am I not offending them? Wasn't I a good mother? Why would I be happy? And you bumped into them in the grocery store. What would you share with them?
Well, I've come to learn, Tina, and believe with everything in my being that we're all individually responsible for our own lives. Yes, we guide our children when they're little, but we can't stop them from making mistakes, can we? We can try to
Child,
train them and
no.
teach them. I mean, the old adage about the hot stove, you can't really learn or teach a child that that stove is hot until they actually touch it themselves and get burned. And that's when they finally learn that it's hot. So I cannot be responsible for even my children's actions. When I look at what has happened, Adam was 18 years old. He was in a lot of pain. He was just, I mean, I can go back to him being an infant and he was colicky and just screamed, and there was nobody could like make him happy, and people wouldn't babysit him for me because they didn't want to be left alone with him, and all those kinds of things. So, he was like always uncomfortable in his own skin in this life. And when I look at that, I have to wonder what he came into this life for. What purpose did he come here to serve? And meanwhile, simultaneously, I'm again diving deep into these spiritual studies for the metaphysical and spiritual and esoteric studies, and the whole thing around the afterlife. I developed a spirituality, a practice, and I developed a specific faith and a specific belief system. And my belief system allows me to understand that every individual soul is responsible for creating their own life. I'm also responsible for creating my own exit point. So Adam was not taken from me. Adam was done. Now, if I want to continue to believe my son was ripped from my life, taken from me, died too soon, it's not fair. If I want to believe those things, fine, but I am going to suffer the consequences of believing those things, which is to live a life in bitterness, depression, and anger. Didn't want that for myself, and I don't think my son would have wanted it either. Because when I connected with him the first time through a medium, and he let me feel the joy he felt as soon as he released from his body and started bouncing as a free spirit all around the room. I felt that. It was
Mhm.
visceral. I felt it in my body. I felt the joy. It shocked me. It slammed into me during a mediumship reading, and I felt his joy. It felt like my son. I could literally feel him, inside my body. And that's when I realized that Adam was okay, and he wanted me to be okay too. And his death led me to my spirituality, which saved my life and allowed me to walk through those other two journeys. Mm. And my beliefs also helped my daughter during her illness come to terms with her own pending death. There was a lot of anxiety and fear around that for her, and she was able to release a lot of it just by understanding the path of the soul and understanding the soul and the oversoul's ability to choose what the human experience needs to be for that soul. So running into people in a grocery store, it's hard because you don't know where they are in their own belief system. So sometimes I tell them, you just have to stretch your mind around. In the beginning, it was always, well, you'd be surprised what the human spirit can bear when it's given no choice. That was the only answer I had in the beginning, Tina.
No, that's fair.
I had no choice.
And in your choices, I think I'd like the last section of the book, page 151. If you would read that page, I think that shows a lot about the choice you have made in this entire process.
Okay. Chapter 7. Surrender. Giving in, not giving up. Typically, we see two trains of thought when it comes to the word surrender. Some view it as giving up when they feel they can't possibly go on or they believe they have no choice, leaving them feeling depleted and often ashamed they couldn't push past their struggle. They feel beaten and can easily become sullen, bitter, and even depressed, depending on how intensely the experience affects their lives. I am of the second group, who sees surrender in a more empowering way. When those like us say we have surrendered to an experience, it's simply our way of saying we vow to stop fighting what is happening and allow it to unfold in divine timing. We trust ourselves, the universe, or God to see us through. We evoke our faith that everything happens for a reason, and we relax into it. We give in and release the struggle, leading us to acceptance and leaving us feeling more peaceful and capable of handling what comes our way. Which group do you find yourself in?
How long did it take you to find yourself in group 2, or do you think you always were a group 2 person?
Well, I've always been a look on the bright side of life person. I've always had friends comment on, oh, Vicky, you always just seem to find the right thing to say. I've always been the person that people flock to and dump their problems on. So I was the go-to person. So when this happened to me, I had no go-to person for that because I was the go-to person. But yeah, I always had a certain penchant for it. That is true. So the trick with us when we come forward to try to help grievers is, we're faced with folks who that is not their underlying personality. And so you have a lot more work to do with those people. And those people are the ones who I really want to take back into phase 1 and stretch their mind and open their hearts a little bit before ever exposing them to the work we do in phase 2. It would be cruel to throw them into phase 2, So, and there are ways we can do that. There's one thing I will say that I learned very early on in one of the books I read after Adam died was that grief is an amplifier. And so what that means is any personality trait that you have or any pre-existing conditions that you have, any pre-existing chemical imbalances in the brain or mental illness or anything that you're struggling with, history of depression, all of that stuff is going to be amplified. So if you are having a really hard time with grief and you don't understand why all these other people in your group seem to be moving on, but you're still stuck, it's time to go back into your previous life and what were you struggling with before? And have you ever done the work to climb your way out of depression before? And what worked for you then? Let's start applying some of that stuff now. And at the end of the day, they're really tough cases. You got to go right into the PSDD treatments. They've got to go right into therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder because this is a trauma event. It's, It is when it happens suddenly, or and there's other experiences around, such as, my daughter's cancer death or expecting death can be very traumatic for people. I chose to view it as a sacred honor. How many parents, mothers are there to watch their child take their first breath and their last. I mean, that's beautiful that I can say that, I think, but that's the perspective I've decided to take on it. It's the spin I've put on it.
It is about choices. I want to circle back to something you just said. You said your previous life. Are you speaking about the life before the people passing or a totally different life of existence that you had?
Just before the people pass. So
Okay.
whatever personality traits and disorders, mental disorders, emotional disorders, or physical ailments, anything that you had going on before the death occurred is going to be exasperated and amplified. And so a lot of what people think oh, my grief is so complex. It's not really that the grief is so complex. It's that you had these other problems that you weren't dealing with that are complicating your ability to handle the grief. So we've got to go back and deal with those. I can't just put a band-aid on your grief. So this is where, when you see this happening in your groups, and it's talked about in my book, I discuss it. There's a whole chapter on it, trying to identify when someone needs more help than your group can give them, and then be ready to make recommendations. We never give out the names of, we're not going to recommend certain therapists and whatnot. That's not what this is about, but just to say you might want to explore private therapy. Or you might want to explore, if you have someone in the past who helped you with your depression or your bipolar or whatever it is you're dealing with, you might want to go back to that doctor and say, this has happened in my life, and now this condition is really rearing its head. What can you do to help me get through? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Vicky, we could go on for hours and hours and hours, probably could.
Good.
Thank you for trusting me to share your story.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. I try to give my guests an opportunity to be the podcast host. So, do you have any questions of me?
I've listened to your episode, so I knew you were going to ask me that. So I was been wondering what I might ask you, and I do have a question. And I ask this of a lot of people I face when I run into people organically with grievers, and we have these conversations. I pick their brain a little bit. So I would like to know: is there something, like one or two things that somebody might have said to you when you first lost Mark that would have dispelled a big chunk of the fear you had going into this grief journey with him? Is there one specific area, if, like, I'm experiencing this, I feel like I'm going crazy, if someone had just told me this was normal, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Is there one thing?
So, one, thank you for listening to the podcast. Appreciate that. For me, I immediately started reading, researching, trying to get more knowledge because for me, knowledge is power. Obviously, I'm not the first person in the world whose husband died. So there must be information out there. And my ability to normalize, to say, this is what you should expect. I can't change it, I can't fix it, but knowing that this is most likely has the potential to be something I would experience helped me. What that looked like, the two things: one, to understand the concept that grief is just not me being sad. There are a lot of mental and physical impacts of grief, period. It's going to impact the way my brain may become sluggish. It impacts the way my prefrontal cortex versus my amygdala. And this is not just, I'm an emotional woman over exaggerating. Grief does this. My body is trying to protect myself from a profound trauma. My husband had a heart attack on vacation in our hotel room. I'm not walking out of there the same woman.
No.
The ability to understand, I will be sleepy. I can't make conscious decisions. Some people may, as you talked about when Adam passed, how that impacts you versus when your husband passed. That what we learned from that impacts how we show up in situations. So understanding the mental and physical part of what that looked like and go, okay, You just gonna have to give it some time. This is keep doing the things you're doing, working out, eating healthy, and you're not sleeping. So since I'm not sleeping, I brought the elliptical into the front room because both the kids were in the military. I was in the house by myself. Well, if I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna be doing something. So knowing that empowered me to not have to try to project manage it, how to rush it. Honey, your whole husband died. You're not a fan of this, but you too will eventually keep living. And in that process, as we're going through this is how I'm going to manage that. That's the knowledge that I found that was helpful for me. The other thing that was extremely helpful for me was my faith and my tribe, my rediscovering, researching what I had believed in God beforehand and seeing does this still fit this version of my life? Because when people in your life leave, like you said, the things that you leverage or the coping skills or things you did, if they didn't show up, they're going to amplify now. So
Mhm.
my faith amplified to remind myself what I believed, to not just be the woe is me, this happened. Okay, everybody's dying. This is how this goes. This is the process. So, what have you believed in? And let that be the rock. The tribe, the representation of my siblings and my friends, which has driven me to this work to some extent. I talk to so many people who say they literally have nobody, that people have not learned how to witness their grief without trying to fix it, or they can't handle it, can't stand beside them. My siblings and my friends stand just as strong now as they did 9 years ago when my husband died. I didn't know how to tell them how to show up all the time, and they were not always needing that, but they knew me and loved me enough to see where things didn't look like well, and they inserted themselves in the process to be there, similar to your friend knowing to gently touch your hand and stand back. Sometimes it was not talking about it. Sometimes it was letting me talk about it. Sometimes was just being there to let me know I am grieving with you. They never tried to say, well, their grief was bigger. He was my husband. But the ability for them to tell me it's still hurting them, it was so comforting in the way that they said it, that my life is never going back to what it was. It's going to something different. I do have a life now that I love, and sometimes I just pause in awe of it.
Yeah.
And those would be the things that I know that were impactful for me and that were allowing me to be where I am today.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give you the opportunity to close this conversation. Maybe there's something that we didn't cover, something else you'd like to share, or just final words. Thank you.
I guess I just want to encourage people to know that, you're not alone. There are so many of us out here who are holding space for you. Even if you can't see us, open your heart, you'll be able to feel us. I will give you a little bit of advice if you're in that phase one group. My heart breaks for the folks that are in acute grief. I mean, I remember how bad it was bad. It was really, really, really bad. And I know what it's like to be in that space. If you can do one nice thing for yourself today, I would ask you to just go outside and be present with your body. Go outside and stand, sit, or lie. I don't care if it's for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as you can manage it. But I want you to just be in your body. Don't take your phone with you. Don't take another person with you. Just feel your body. Feel your feet on the surface you're standing on, or your butt on the surface you're sitting on. Feel the breeze lifting your hair. Feel the sun on your face. Not acknowledge it and feel it. This is how you begin to teach your brain and your body that you are safe and that you are here and that you are alive. Because let's face it, it feels like part of us left with them. when that first happens. And in a sense, somewhere up here, our brain believes that we are also dead. That's why one of the chapters is called Zombies Chasing Ghosts, because you're literally like a zombie walking around with zombie motions. You can't even remember that you're supposed to brush your teeth in the morning, and you're supposed to forge a new path in the world. Just be present in your body. 5 minutes a day. That's all. That's all. Start there. That's all. You just have to start.
Thank you, Vicky, for being here and sharing.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Tina. Bless you.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune in to Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then, visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.